All right. Well, with that, I think it's a perfect segue and time for our main topic, defining security tokens. And actually, there was an article that recently came out that certainly put a spotlight on digital securities and security tokens because it was published in VentureBeat, one of the bigger tech media publications, titling "The Tokenization of Securities is Happening Right Now and No One is Noticing." Kyle and I are big fans of anybody who's cheerleading for the industry, trying to educate the space about the opportunity. But to me, this article is perfectly timed for our main topic this week because it itself has some discrepancies and issues in terms of defining what is a digital security versus a security token versus a utility token. Specifically in this article, they talk about the big momentum of the Reg A Plus approvals, putting a spotlight on blockchain technology, what it does, even defining in the article that security tokens are something that represents a share in the company. However, later on, it also defines the Reg A Plus offerings as proof that digital securities and tokenized securities are approved and on the way, and we have to call out inaccuracies on the show. That's what we also do, Kyle, and this one is one of them. In fact, for those of you who are listening to our Reg A Plus podcast episode, you might have even recalled where we mentioned that both Reg A Plus offerings that were approved, Blockstacks and YouNow, both define themselves as not securities. One of them specifically even commenting that they don't even know what they are at all. But certainly not digital securities. That is the last thing that they want to be marked as and defined as. So this is a perfect leeway because the whole point of what's been happening around the globe lastly, and specifically in the last couple of weeks with Malta, just now with the FCA, Taiwan, Seychelles, and many other jurisdictions where they have been trying to define tokenized securities, almost all equivocally going for taking traditional securities definitions and simply saying that they are tokenized. But the purpose of this is so much more important, which is that it gives them legitimacy, it gives security tokens operating room for infrastructure and ecosystems to grow, and it makes investors comfort and confident that what they are buying and participating in has legal protection that they can use. Because without that, simply the digital securities and tokenized securities market will not foster and grow. And so if it hasn't been made clear for anyone listening already, for us, security tokens and asset-backed tokens are unequivocally the same as how capital market regulators are defining them all around the world, which is we are talking about traditional securities that are tokenized. In many cases, you can have asset-backed specific tokens. When it comes to commodities and things like that, and cryptocurrencies, they all have different regulators. And when we talk about security tokens, it is tokenized securities, which are often a representative of a basket of underlying assets. Kyle, I'll pass it over to you about your thoughts around this whole subject. Maybe you define it differently. That would be surprising. But let's hear it.
Yeah, I think that it's good feedback for the general public because the reality is what we are dealing with is still a very niche and complicated industry. And so it is important to build the hype and branding around the security token and help people understand what this offering is. But at the same time, it is important that we're correct in terms of how we're distinguishing these things from other offerings and providing that to investors moving forward and institutions and financial services providers. And so just like I've been saying and we've mentioned before in this podcast and in others, it's important that everyone has the same definition when talking about how these things are interoperable because it doesn't just exist on one exchange in one country. We're talking about assets that will be globalized and trade around the world. And so we do need to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we can and what we can't trade. And so I totally agree on your definition, and I really do think that it's incredibly important that we distinguish because while these exemptions are valuable for providing the highest level of regulation compliance for issuers, not everyone is going to be a security token. And so it is important as somebody that's interested in this space or as an investor that to look into doing your due diligence to make sure you know what you're investing in and participating in all of these offerings accordingly. So I think it's incredibly important to make the distinction between compliant ICOs that are really participating in the utility and the network and comparing that to our tokenized assets.
I'm going to run off of that a little bit, Kyle, because it is extremely important. This was a major milestone for the crypto industry, and I know many of our listeners also follow that as well. But of course, it's not the purpose of our show, but in this case, for our subject, it is extremely relevant because even from a tax perspective, how you classify a utility token or a cryptocurrency or an actual security token is dramatically different. And this is why the importance of defining security tokens on a legal level by regulators is so important. What we've seen unfold now, Kyle, in the US is we have the traditional securities laws that define assets via securities, I should say, via the Howey test. And if you meet those, you now need to follow securities laws. There has been a concern because of a lack of definition around utility tokens and cryptocurrencies, specifically utility tokens. And so the result of the market, because we haven't gotten the necessary clarity from the SEC, is that you should issue those tokens as if they were security tokens, following the compliance of the law. And then after the fact, and always ensuring and defining that it remains a utility token, hence why both projects will not openly define that their tokens are indeed security tokens or anything like that, because that's not their goal. They are meant to try and create utility, and the idea being that because there is no official regulation around this, with enough acceptance with something like Ethereum, you can avoid a classification like that. And it's groundbreaking because not only did the SEC approve a compliant way for these projects to raise capital, but it also gave light, as well as with a recent no action letter by Proof of Quarters, on how to do it properly. And honestly, for 95% of issuers, it doesn't make sense. They don't have enough resources to go through the legal that the other two projects located. But more importantly, there are other restrictions. I'm not going to go into them because, again, we're not a cryptocurrency podcast. But at the end of the day, one of them was not using the funds to build out the platform, which is what many entrepreneurs looking to build a utility-based ecosystem aim to do. That's why they're raising money. So, I just think it's extremely, extremely important that this is happening. The U.S. is definitely behind as of right now in defining and classifying the different types of tokens. But it is important to recognize that as long as you're following securities law, you can pretty much issue any type of token here in the United States, given a lot of the guidance that has been given now. Kyle, any comments?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. The clarity is just going to continue to be crucial because the more clear we are on our definitions, the easier it is to draw out the implications of each individual investment vehicle or each individual asset. And this is relevant for even both of those Reg A plus offerings that I think at least one of them mentioned they recognize that right now they are a security, but then at some point they will not be a security. You had mentioned specifically that they said they didn't want to be considered a security token, and they're certainly not backed by an asset like a security token promises. But they even in their own exemption say one day they hope to not even be a security at all. And so, with a lot of this kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out kind of language, it does make it difficult to draw out those implications and figure out how these things are going to be taxed, because or any of the other huge implications in this system that we need to really understand and communicate more clearly to figure out how these things can be handled. Because if one day it's a security and the next day it's this, the next day it's that, it does get difficult to really distinguish how to proceed with these offerings. So at the very least, what I think that we all need to agree on and get behind is what we define as a security token. And at the end of the day, that's the really important thing that we seem to, around the world, be establishing the definition of security token as an asset-backed, legally binding digital token that represents that asset. And so that underlying asset is crucial in building a security token and in having something that can be transferred around the world. And so we need to continue pushing that definition and those that visibility moving forward everywhere.
Yeah, and that's why things get complicated, because you can, tokenize assets directly, but at the end of the day, if you want to do this at scale, it likely turns into a security very quickly, because you have to house the assets into a fund-like vehicle like an SPV, or trigger any of the other requirements of the Howey test. So it's a super, super important category to define. And at the end of the day, it's still a glimmering shining of light here for the crypto industry, because at the very least, the SEC has further tried to define the way for utility tokens to also be able to issue and raise funds, which is to follow traditional securities law. I think that is all the time we have for the show today. Again, as always, I want to thank everyone for listening. Please send us your feedback. I'm on LinkedIn, Kyle's on Twitter. And of course, please also share with others the show. We're trying to grow, and the more information that we're able to get every week, the better quality value we can give back.
Definitely check out stomarket.com/news. That's where we source our information from. That's where we talk about everything on the podcast, as well as through my Twitter and through Herwig's LinkedIn. So definitely reach out to us personally, or even just submit it through the platform, and let's get talking. We definitely have a lot of active users that are commenting and voting and submitting articles, and it's very helpful for us. If you're a project or working in the space, definitely let us know what's going on in your life so that we can give you some shout outs and give credit where credit's due. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.